We're back with our next agency, which is going to be the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services. At this time, we will be hearing a presentation from the agency at this time.
Good afternoon, everyone. First and foremost, thank you very much for having me today, as well as accommodating my scheduling request, so thank you so much.
Dr. Simmons, can you just state your first and your last name and also just the title?
Ernestina Simmons, the Director for the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services.
And whenever you're ready to begin your presentation, we can start.
Thank you. All right, again. Ernestina Simmons, the Director for the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services. Our office's mission is to make homelessness rare and brief for the Baltimore City. What you're looking at here is our organizational chart. This year, we have been able to do a little bit of restructuring, and that looks like hiring a deputy director, realigning our agency to have a chief of emergency services, a chief of policy and partnership. And so what we're going to talk about today is just how our service lines are developed. 356, of course, is administration, what we just talked about. Also, some of the things that we've done is we've highly intentional about adding on program compliance and accounting staff for many different reasons. Our office is highly regulated with several federal, state, local funds, so you have to have a strong core in back of that. Next, we're going to look at homeless prevention services, outreach services, temporary housing for homelessness, and permanent supportive housing. In fiscal year 2026, our goal is to serve 4,000 households, but in 2024, collectively for MOHS, we served over 21,000 households through our emergency shelter, street outreach, permanent supportive housing programs. What we're looking at here in the operating budget, it has $6.6 million associated with administration. One of the items that's also a part of this $6.6 million has to do with the outreach services. We rely on the City of Baltimore as it's related to our outreach teams, and the rest of it is about our administration and our staff for that purpose. Now we get into the fun. This line is 893. It's looking at homeless prevention services. As you can note, for fiscal year 2024, our goal and target for fiscal year 2024 was 500 people through our diversion programs. For the percentage of clients that presented with homelessness for the first time, the goal was 75%. But what I want to lift up here is you really want this number to go down. You don't want this number to go up. When we think about homeless prevention for MOHS, this has to do with our navigators that's in the libraries. Part of what they're doing is they're meeting with people that's at risk of homelessness and what are the services that we can provide. Year to date, we have served 709 clients through our diversion programs. And again, that's really through that relationship with the libraries. Our navigators are in Waverly, Walbrook, and Cherry Hill. The other thing I'll lift up about here is when it talks about the percentage of clients that's experiencing homelessness for the first time. In fiscal year 2024, we were looking 60% was our actuals versus where we are year to date from 7/1/2024 to present. That number is 39%. 39% of the clients that we're encountering through the diversion programs, this is their first time experiencing homelessness. The next line is looking at the emergency shelter and temporary housing for homelessness. This points to the street outreach and the street enrollments of what we see. I think since I've been here, we talked quite a bit about the goals for how do we get clients from the street into housing far more rapidly than what our system is able to do at this point in time. What this is looking at here is the target for fiscal year 2025, looking at street outreach teams. Again, this is a number that we don't want to see go up, but year to date, we have served almost 4,000 clients through our street outreach teams. Looking at the part of the challenges with clients that are experiencing street homelessness is the lack of access points. Also, it's fairly complex of being able to navigate and get paperwork done. And what we ask of people is you need to have identification. You need to be able to complete this application. You need to show up at this appointment and that appointment. So that can be very challenging for people that's experiencing street homelessness. The second metric that you're looking at is the percentage of clients who exit from shelter into outreach. Our actuals for 2024 was 16%. Our goal for 2025 is 27%. We can get into it a little bit later. That can kind of help understand where we are as a city as it's related to street outreach. What I'll say here is some of this work also occurs in our encampment protocol. We've noticed for clients that's coming through the targeted encampment work, we have a higher percentage of getting them navigated, connected to services. Like that percentage for clients being navigated through the encampment work is 42% versus the norm for what we see is far less, more along the lines of 20% at best for clients that are navigated that's on the street. The other difference that we see is the shelter acceptance. Coming through the encampment protocol, 63% of the clients are accepting shelter, and that's not the norm of a number. However, we have to do better with getting clients to stay in the shelters that's coming from the street, because it's not just about them accepting, it's how can we get them to stay and get navigated, connected to the rest of the services. Part of what we're looking at today with emergency shelters is this is our largest amount of dollars that we really rely on the city for. How can we fund emergency shelters? In 2024, we received 19,874 calls from people that was in need of a shelter bed. When we look at our paid results for 2025, we had 2,039 people on that one point in time. But as we all know, that's just a snapshot of our system. That's not indicative of what's happening in our community. What is real is that we are having increases in clients experiencing homelessness across the board. The clients that are experiencing street homelessness, from 2023 to 2025, it was once 113 people. The last pit count had 188 clients that was on the street. But when we think about the street enrollments that we talked about, it's almost 4,000 people that's enrolled in street outreach. The next slide is taking a look at housing. A lot of what MOHS is charged with is rental assistance programs through the continuum of care, as well as through HOPWA and our relationships with the Housing Authority of Baltimore City. What we're looking at here is the number of households that's going to retain permanent housing. Our target is 90%. Our average as a community is roughly 95% of the clients that get housing are able to stay in housing. In fiscal year 2024, we served 4,921 clients through our housing programs. I also want to lift up that we received 1,458 vouchers through our relationship with the Housing Authority of Baltimore City. That would conclude my presentation, ladies and gentlemen.
I hear the sheet's coming. We're going to start with Councilmember Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is the focus area for this is the joint investigations. The budget allocation for this service has decreased significantly since fiscal year 24. And have we seen a decrease in the amount of city residents at risk for homelessness post-pandemic to explain the decrease in funding for the service area? Eviction prevention, rapid rehousing has $0 in funding for FY2026, yet people are still struggling to afford increasing housing costs, and rental assistance is limited. Can MOHS offer any metrics that suggest that there isn't an increased need for eviction prevention services?
No, I'd say the opposite. What we're going to continue to see is we heavily relied on ARPA dollars for eviction prevention dollars. We served almost 400 households through that program, and when you looked at the slide as it's related to diversion work, that speaks to the need for eviction prevention dollars. A lot of the clients that was served through there was diverted from homelessness because of those dollars. That's always been a space that MOHS has never really had funded. When you look at the decrease in our allocation, this budget is actually proposing an increase from the general funds. Part of what is decreased for us has to do with the other programs that might be around us. And for example, I'll continue to lift up losing these ARPA dollars or them being fully expended is going to have a tremendous impact. We see clients entering homelessness for the first time at a very large number in 2024/2025 with limited resources in order to provide that support.
Okay, and have you, I mean, I'm sure you guys have talked internally about this. This is probably what you talk about a lot. Do you guys have any like alternative ways to kind of address this? Or I know, you know, federally we're being limited by the capacity of which we can do things, but are there outside partners that you are working with to ensure that we can fill the gaps as much as we can?
It's going to be a tough gap to fill if I'm being completely transparent. What we're trying to do going into this year, we're building up the capacity in the city through our shelters. Part of what we have to do as a community is your housing programs have to be strong. So we're doing a lot of training, a lot of support. Part of what I like to help, part of my conversations is always surrounding fair market rent, the increases for rent. We rely on federal programs in order to pay rents, rather it's through the COC, rather it's HOPA. But what that impact does for people coming into our ecosystem, with the increase in utility assistance, I'll use that just as an example. And when you have a client that has no rental income, they have no income, you pay 30% of your rent, you're still responsible for your utilities. As such, we're now seeing more people coming to the ecosystem that needs utility assistance. And that just goes into our teams really trying to reach out to community partners to understand what resources and dollars that they have available. But it is a space that's causing more clients to enter into our system. I think our navigation team and our shelter providers and our housing providers are doing as well as anybody can be doing in this market as finding additional community resources. We held a stakeholder engagement session it feels like a couple of weeks ago, but it was actually a week ago. And the purpose of that session was for us to bring together the nonprofit organizations that's doing this work, that we fund, that we don't fund. What we wanted them to do was to start to leverage each other's resources. So they were able to use the time to talk about, what is it that I fund, that my resources are going to be limited, this has been cut. So we started that conversation through 4 different community sessions. This season is going to take partners being willing to partner with each other and leverage their own resources. So it was a great meeting, it was a great kickoff. And then we did it 3 more times for that purpose of realizing that if you once did eviction prevention or you once had dollars for food and dollars for support, you might not have those resources anymore, but someone else does. So our community partners have been highly responsive to being able to leverage each other, which is really what this is going to take.
I appreciate that answer because, you know, for the foreseeable future, we're not going to get the help that everyone needs. This is a necessity. And I'm happy to hear that you guys are leading the charge and making sure that networks aren't working in silos and not talking to each other. And in the long run, this is going to benefit us in this city for years to come, because we just know historically that, like, you know, just people in color in this country have always been shut out of the system. And one of the things that, you know, provided us relief back in, you know, the 20s and even before 30s, 40s was the sense of community and people working together. And so I am happy and encouraged by that. So I do thank you for that. I want to ask my second question, and this is about about homeless prevention. And quite frankly, I'm a little concerned that there's one employee who services the entire city, and especially given the performance measurements that reflect the fiscal year, there was 697 clients who were provided services, and the target was 600. I mean, I probably know the answer to this. Do you think this is acceptable caseload for one individual? I guess alternatively, how are you guys working around giving that person relief or assistance?
Yes, if it was one person, she'd quit. So no, it is not one person. It's actually a team of 5, but it's not coming out of this budget. It's coming out of the ARPA budget and other funding sources. For this budget, it's one person, but however, there are 5 people that's doing that work.
Okay, and so in the future, because you say it was ARPA funded, like, will it be one person? Or are we looking to work with the administration to, transfer some, if not all of those, into the general fund? And I'm sure Laura will be able to answer. Yep.
Yes, so Councilman, Homeless Services is one of the agencies that continues to have a personnel cost funded by ARPA in their 26 budget. Those costs don't show up in the annual budget because the full ARPA award was budgeted in its totality when the city received that award a number of years ago. These positions that are still funded by ARPA and that will expire during fiscal 27, those will all be evaluated by the administration as we begin work on the fiscal 27 budget.
Okay, thank you for that answer, because obviously we all know that this is something that we're going to need. A part of making sure that we keep people, we help people out of homelessness is also making sure that we prevent people from entering homelessness. And so thank you for that answer. And I guess next year I'll have even more questions about this, and hopefully we can find the funding we need to make sure that we can prevent as many people as possible from experiencing homelessness. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Gray. We're going to be moving to Councilman Blanchard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Director. So, and I think you know what I'm going to be bringing up. We had the committee request, or I had a committee request when we had our investigative, our hearing over homelessness in the city. And one of the points of the committee request was rent prices by year in the city. And that I asked because I believe both you and Kevin Lindemood from Healthcare for the Homeless brought up the impact of increases in rent in driving homelessness. And so you sent over, I think this is the fair market rent determined by HUD values, year over year between 2022 and 2024. And in that 2-year period, even a 1-bedroom or a studio unit, we saw an increase in the median rent of $400, which is staggering. And we, correspondingly saw, I don't know, quick math, like 30% increase in the homeless population in the city, or at least in the clients served. And I recognize there's a couple driving factors there. But, so I mean, just how much is there's like there's obviously multiple things that go in substance abuse challenges in the opioid epidemic, protections or lack of protections involving eviction more generally, domestic abuse, what have you. But I mean, how much is this just like, is the homelessness problem a problem with rent being too expensive?
I think that's at the top of it. Baltimore City rents are incredibly high. And so for the request that was made of MOHS, it really the ask was to take a look at fair market rent from 2022 to current. Let's look at the increases and how is this impacting more households coming into the ecosystem. What we're talking about is from 2022 for an efficiency, 2022 to 2024, it's almost a 27% increase in fair market rent from where we are now. And I think I had shared in a previous presentation a few weeks ago, the average household in Baltimore City might have $15,000 a year for who we serve. You're not going to be able to afford rent with the fair market rents being what they are and what we're seeing for what is the average rent in the city. I think that this lifts up for people that anyone can be experiencing homelessness. And the driving rents makes it so important for us to think about affordable housing affordable housing is going to help those clients that are in low income. It's not necessarily going to solve for my clients with zero income. However, it will solve for people that cannot afford to pay these astronomical rents. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing more people that are employed that just can't afford rents.
So are you seeing an increase in like, I don't know, people who are both employed and homeless?
We are. We absolutely have people in our shelters that are working. There's some other challenges with that, but we have people in our shelters that are working, or people that are on the street doing diversion programs that just can't afford rent. And I think part of what the data request was about was how many evictions have happened in Baltimore City this year, 2024 data. I think it was about 26% of the evictions were in Baltimore City out of the 19,000. So there was 19,000 evictions, about 7,600 of those was from Baltimore City. And it was attributed to failure to pay rent. And that really is, those households come into this system.
Okay, thank you, Director. And I'll just make a brief comment here of I think this is an incredibly strong argument to make, I think, for the housing options and opportunities legislative package that's going through. Is one of the key points is it's not just, it's allowing for housing that is to be built. A lot of the housing, that new housing we've seen in the city that's been built over the last 20 years or whatever, is the high end, the market rate housing, where some positive impact in that driving down rent, but actually having the flexibility to build housing that isn't $2,500 a month for a studio apartment is incredibly important. So thank you for that.
Thank you, sir. Absolutely agree.
Vice President Middleton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, thank you for all of you for the work that you do in trying to help the homelessness. So I'll start with a statement just to piggyback on my colleague that just talked about the rent. I think, first of all, I want to thank the mayor for understanding and supporting the bill that I put in, like right after COVID, the Security Deposit Relief Act, which maybe kind of would help to answer some of the councilman's questions, but that act, I think, really helped keep a lot of people from becoming homeless, especially, single women with children and people that have lost their jobs. That security deposit, helping to take care of that, believe me, really helps at the beginning. So again, I want to thank the mayor for supporting that and trying to keep that moving along. So I guess my question is, we know we have the mandate for group homes in the city, and we have a number of group homes that are for homelessness. And I guess my question is, how do you work with code enforcement to kind of keep that regulated? Because a lot of these group homes have come up in areas that are around homeowners, and it's just, everyone knows that any of us could be homeless for various reasons. And, but there has to be certain placements. Our city is just so diverse in different kind of neighborhoods, and to have this mandate, and I've just noticed some changes in neighborhoods because of this stigma. What is your, please respond.
Yes, ma'am. MOHS, we don't have any group homes within our portfolio, so that would more than likely be a different office. The only congregate spaces that we have is WHRC, which is our congregate shelter, but there are no group homes within our portfolio. I think there was some time ago where you saw transitional housing projects were all over the city as it was relating to substance abuse, but that is not in MOHS's portfolio. That is not something that we're involved with, and we don't have any group homes in our portfolio.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilwoman Ramos?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director. Your work basically has doubled, right? As a result of the eviction crisis, people not affording their bills. And you've, I think, done a great job of trying to reach out as much as possible. I'm really concerned that 77% of your budget is federal money. And I have, even in good times, that's a concern, right? But now we're in like really bad. And so I would like to know a little bit more about, A, how can we help? And B, what is the plan working with the administration to be able to serve those over 2,000 people that you've served and are going to need to continue to keep serving, plus all of the new people that are likely to come through your doors?
I think that currently it's almost 5,000 households that we serve through these rental assistance programs. Through the continuum of care, that's almost 1,000 households. You look at the housing opportunities for people with AIDS program, and then HABC, which is 1,500 units for us, and they're expecting a 40% reduction that is absolute coming and pending. I think that what we have to do is understand the power of voices and advocacy surrounding what's happening with these federal cuts. They're going to be so impactful that I can't in good conscience say to you, how can we replace $55 million in rental assistance dollars? That is what we put out as a community. So I think that what I'm hoping, all of these community engagement sessions and stakeholders and meeting with federal and state partners and local, what we have to do as a community is understand these impacts, the amount of households that would lose their housing essentially. We have a real life example that's happening that's not an impending, right? We have emergency housing vouchers. For those that you might not be familiar, emergency housing vouchers was a result of COVID. We was looking at ways that we can use some of the COVID relief dollars, dedicating them to people experiencing homelessness and people that was victims of domestic violence, and how can you house them rapidly. What our community decided to do was, clearly we housed 291 people. The commitment at that time for the federal government was these dollars was gonna last through 2030. What we now know is those dollars are gone. Those dollars are not gonna last past 2026. And that's real. That's 259 people that's leased up right now in a unit that if we collectively can't come together and figure out how do we save those households from coming into homelessness. I think when I met with my community 2 weeks ago, what I said to them is we have to look at what's happening on the emergency housing voucher side and look at it as a snapshot. Well, what can be real? We never anticipated that happening on EHV. What we're now doing is working with the Housing Authority of Baltimore City. We're working with the state of Maryland. We're looking at our current housing programs for ways that we can make sure these 200 and I believe 59 households don't return to homelessness. But if we start to talk about this number as almost 5,000, right? So I think this is going to take for us realizing that it's going to take every single person to effectively advocate for what these changes are going to mean. It would be incredibly difficult for me to come up with a strategy for that, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, well, that's what we want, is for that. And that means that there will be, that this will have a significant, I mean, this agency and also health are the ones that are impacted, I think, the most. And because health is like 70-something% grant funded too. And so I think we probably want to, we don't have to do it today. You know, I'd like to figure out how to be involved with that. We do have, you know, philanthropy, but philanthropy is not going to be able to fill this gap. We've got to go to our federal partners. We've got to go to our state partners. And really think through not just the service provided today, but what is likely to come. And so I wanted to make sure that we were really hearing from you what that impact is going to look like. And I think it's very hard to say, yeah, we're going to move money around and try to fix this. It's just that there's no money there. And so I'm happy to like work with you and figure this out. I'm going to say the same thing basically to everyone, but I think this is a really key piece here. The other question that I had was, you had mentioned, there are several causes, if you will, of homelessness. So that's not a good word, but you know what I mean. And is there in a normal time, is there a feedback loop that you have to say, like, look, we've got X amount of people who have recently entered homelessness who said they had to leave that home because they either got evicted or they had electric, or it was a domestic issue? Because what I would like to try to figure out is then looking back at those numbers to say, okay, well then we need these many units of affordable housing, and what does that look like? And we're obviously, the mayor's office and your office have done that to an extent, because you said, you know what, we're going to take these 2 hotels, we're now going to turn them into housing because that's what we ultimately need. There's more land there, we'll build something else there too, that'll be more housing. I think, if we had a master plan of what those numbers are going to look like, and I guess the department is going to send out their housing master plan at some point in time, which we were supposed to get in March, but okay, and figure out what that looks like. I think that'll help us with coming up with that plan. But I guess there's sort of the planning part, but then there's also the feedback loop. Like all of a sudden, we're seeing people from Northwest Baltimore, homeless because of some incident that happened, or something like that. Do you have that with HABC and with DHCD?
Yes, so a couple of thoughts in responses to the stakeholder engagement session that I was referring to. It included federal, state, and the philanthropic space to take a look at this, and I can definitely send you our talking points that we've agreed to as a community of what it is that we're going to be advocating for. So we can absolutely send that to you. What I take a look at is I'm a data fanatic to the point that I try not to overwhelm people with too much information.
Yeah, me too.
What we have, it was 2,801 households that entered homelessness for the first time. Before I leave here today, I can pull out my spreadsheet and tell you where those households came from. But the way that I also look at it is how many clients were served through our shelters in the first-time homelessness. So for 2024, that's 17,925 people that came through homeless services, not because of a want, but because of a need, whether that was rental assistance, homelessness, or just in need of some additional support for a basic need. In that 2,810 are inclusive of those that were experiencing homelessness for the first time. So I can share with you just a breakdown a little bit more of what those households look like. The other thing that we're doing now is we're looking at our homeless response system to do something very similar to what you just asked. The way that we've always prioritized people for permanent supportive housing is you look at the most chronic person in your system and you offer them housing. What I think I'm sharing with our community is that we need to have a more equitable approach as we're looking at clients that's experiencing homelessness. We don't have any interventions right now for people that are experiencing homelessness for the first time. Our system says to you, let me wait for you to have this repeated experience. And so what we're doing now is trying to work on an approach that there are some housing interventions that's dedicated to people that's for the first time. That might be a perfect example of when you look at affordable housing programs. A lot of people that's experiencing homelessness for the first time have income but just can't afford to live. They're perfect candidates as you think about affordable housing.
Yes, well, I think this council has been very clear about making sure that there is enough housing for people and that we have good affordable housing. We know we don't have enough. And so, continuing to do that. Yes, I would love those statistics, and then also meet with you about, what those next steps are in your mind, and then we can come up with a strategy because it's gonna happen. I mean, so we don't know when.
Yes, ma'am.
So I appreciate that, and the more data, the better in my book. So thank you, Madam Chair. I'll wait till the next round.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Porter?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Director, I want to talk through the operating and service provider contracts for the city. I know that's something that you've been laser focused on in collaboration with the COC, just kind of hearing some of their remarks from the board meetings. So my question focuses on, with the 47% increase in shelter operating costs, can you share with me kind of what your thoughts or strategy and approach to measuring value and accountability? Because you just said something that rang true. The system is set up for people in the most extreme of cases. And so what are we doing to operate in a way of looking at that logic pathway of saying if they're first time experiencing homelessness, and I would even take it back a step further, if they are 1 to 2 months behind in rent, how can we track those folks to ensure that they get some sort of assistance and or shelter option so that they're not formally experiencing homelessness in the most chronic state that we often see in our city?
Yes, ma'am. A breakout. So the increase for operations for emergency shelters, what that did is we're asking for more shelter beds and more shelter space. Our shelters operate as a low barrier shelter, meaning you can come in and we don't have any requirements. But what we have done is we've launched a participation agreement with all of the clients that's coming in the shelter. But what we also did for our providers is we've made them responsible for engaging clients after 3 days of being in the shelter and doing diversion work. So if this is your first time experiencing homelessness, the shelter environment is not a normal environment, right? So if we are requiring our partners to meet with the clients within 3 days. Of course, our clients can decline and say that I don't want to meet with you, but it's a part of the agreement. And so within the shelter operations and the budgets, they have line items that is related to helping people exit to, rather that's security deposit, rather that's connecting them to BG&E. Oftentimes, those are barriers for clients of getting, you can have an eviction, you can have an outstanding BG&E bill. So in our emergency shelters, we're asking them to do diversion work and do it aggressively, not having clients stay in shelters for longer than what, I won't say what they need to, because no one is gonna stay in, I won't say that either. I will say that no one wants to be in a shelter. There are reasons that people are in a shelter, and what we're asking our agencies to do is meet with them, engage, do diversion work. On the COC side, those programs you're housed in the COC projects. They're rental assistance projects. Part of what was the challenge for us early on was how did we align in making sure our COC providers was paid on time, in ensuring that people were not going to be evicted as a result of late rental payments. I'd like to say thank you to the Department of Finance, really, because they helped us to figure this out on the COC side. And what that looked like is oftentimes we hear about our federal grants are all on different time periods. That's not really the reason that people were not paid on time. It was more about the BOE process that was making this a lot tougher. So what we was able to do with the Department of Finance, and they have been wonderful human beings, and Laura and the rest of them also, what we were able to do is when we get an award for COC, meaning it's a blanket, it comes through as a full-blown award with all of the contracts and all of the dollars on it, we've been able to put that in front of BOE. And being that we're able to put that in front of BOE and that's approved, that means the dollars are approved and I'm no longer having to not pay clients rental assistance. So that has made the tremendous difference. What we have on the other side, though, with COC programs is that Those units are tenant-based rental assistance units. People have to pay their BG&E bill. You still have a normal landlord arrangement. However, it's a federal subsidy. Therefore, you have to make sure that unit passes HQS inspection every single year. So we are getting calls because we are making sure if your unit is not HQS compliant, then technically I cannot spend any federal dollars to pay that rent. That's a challenge for landlords that are trying to get, that are just not used to being held accountable to making sure that something is HQS compliant. It runs into challenges for the tenant though, right? But if your unit is not compliant, meaning it's not deemed as a safe space to live, we can't use federal dollars to pay for it.
No, thank you for that. And the reason why, colleagues, the reason why I bring that up is because Director Simmons has given me kind of a crash course in the connection between MOHS and COC, and I encourage colleagues to kind of really understand that process, because what she's describing is federal dollars with the Continuum of Care Board and the delineation within her budget that we currently would vote on for MOHS. So two separate funds intermingling together to solve this homelessness and housing crisis. So definitely just want to applaud you for that. Number two, we've gotten quite a few emails about safety and retaliation within our shelters. Can you speak to the, the safety protocols that you are kind of implementing within these shelters, particularly ones that house women and children, and then also with families as well? We've gotten, I know colleagues and myself have gotten quite a few emails from many of the advocates regarding some of the safety issues that are happening within our shelters.
Thank you. I've gotten those emails too. Part of what we look at we have two shelter sites for families. We have Sarah's Hope and we have the Sleep In. Both of those projects, they manage a little bit differently. For the Sleep In particular, that project is managed by, it has 24/7 security. That's a part of that program. We've spent roughly, that contract is almost $3 million for case management support and mental health services that's supposed to be in that building providing the services. As an agency, what we have done, particularly I won't limit it to just that program. As we receive any form of complaints and concerns, that agency in particular is responsible for several shelters. So we met with them to take a look at their policies, procedures, and practices, and looking at some of their training modules and making different recommendations as is related to training. As an example, a lot of agencies that are, let's just say, CARF accredited to provide a service, whether it's a behavioral health or mental health service, they oftentimes rely on an electronic system to do training called Relias. What that means is, as for me, I think training has to be in person. I just naturally believe that. And so as I'm looking at a lot of our shelters, we've been asking them to move their training modules to be in person. We've been providing some training with BCRI for trauma-informed care and practices. So we've also stepped up our level of requirements for training for our shelter providers, but at the same time, they are responsible for their training module. They are contractually responsible, but we've done a better job at enforcing that. Another thing that we're doing now with our shelter providers is we have a monthly meeting with them. That meeting was originally geared towards talking about shelter outcomes. Is how are you engaging? Are you doing the participation agreement? Here's what your data is showing. How are you exiting people? But we've increased those conversations to also be about concerns that's coming up in the facilities. What I'll also say, part of the challenge or part of the reality of emergency shelters is it's a lot of people that are in emergency shelters, and services are not mandated in a low barrier shelter. Services are optional for clients. So as such, if you decline mental health services and you decline substance abuse services, our provider cannot to engage in those services. Sorry about the microphone.
No, you're good. Thank you so much for that question. Thank you. I'll save my next questions to the next round. Thank you.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Ramos is next unless Council President Cohen has a comment. Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director, earlier you mentioned that you're getting, people into the shelters and the hotels, and you're trying to make sure that they are staying so that they're able to receive service, because that's really the first step in receiving service and hopefully getting stable housing. But only 63% of the encampments, people in the encampments are accepting shelter, but not very many are staying. Is that what I heard you say? So what's going on there? Is it, there is one particular in my district that I know all about. We don't have to talk about it, but like, I know that there's, what is that hesitancy that we're seeing? And that's probably it's not the first time homeless residents, it's probably our chronically that are, so tell us a little bit more about what's happening there. Because, we have developed this whole protocol, which I am, grateful for, to try to make sure that folks are safe. And so by being safe, that they are able to get out of the environment and into shelter or the start of the process, hotel, whatever it is. And so what's going on there that they're not staying?
For the clients that has been on the street for an extensive period of time, you're not confining them. And that can just feel like a completely different environment. Oftentimes coming into the shelters, you can bring 2 bags of items. If you've had a lot of bags and a lot of possessions, that's challenging. And also just the environment period of, you have a curfew, you're not used to having a curfew. There are rules that you have to comply by in the shelters. However, that can also feel very uncomfortable. And also a part of the security process of getting into the shelters is you do go through a security. Your bags are checked. Those are things that can feel uncomfortable for a person that can say, I've been living on the street, I'm okay, or I accepted shelter, it was fine, I'll go back when I want to go back. And it's just this in and out relationship. I think that it's difficult for clients to want to stay in shelter that's used to being on the street for an extended period of time. What I'm hoping that we can do, though, in the upcoming, I live my life in quarters, in the upcoming quarter, we're looking at expanding what our outreach teams are doing. And what that means is people have a routine. That's the way that I like to describe it, is people have a routine. If our teams are working 8:30 to 4:30 and you're trying to navigate into service connection at normal business hours, someone that was on the street will be far more willing to engage at 6 p.m. than join their normal routine. So we have to become a little bit more flexible in our approach and our service delivery, especially as it's related to clients experiencing street homelessness. Part of one of the stakeholder sessions that we had was talking to providers about their willingness to expand their hours and to talking to our shelters about what would it look like if your case managers worked until 9 p.m. instead of this normal business hours. So asking them to think about shifts in your own programs and process, because although shelters are 24 hours, those skilled staff that's doing the mental health and the substance abuse, oftentimes they're normal business hours, and that's just not going to be our approach starting next quarter. We just have to be more flexible.
Yeah, I think meeting people where they are is really what we're talking about here. So you've recognized that as, doing some of this work. Plus there's just so many more people that are needing the service. So I appreciate that. I wanted to go back to what we talked about before and actually make a formal committee request so that it's on the record and the rest of the council can also get it. And those were the talking points you talked about that the stakeholder group put together to help with advocacy for additional funding and capacity for the work. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I think it'll be helpful for the rest of the council to see. So sure, I'll write it down on an email too so that you have it as well. But it's basically the talking points that the stakeholder group that the director has put together to help to advocate for more funding and more capacity for the department.
You got that, Marguerite?
Yeah, I'm going to send it in an email like I do
Alright.
the others, but, yeah, thank you, Director. I think it's a yeoman's task that you're doing, and trying to reform the entire system was really your first year, and now it's refinement and service. And then, of course, crisis mitigation when and if the crash comes. Really appreciate you sticking with us and for doing this work. You know, I really appreciate it. And all of your team has been very responsive and very good. And so I think we're finally, you know, turning the corner there. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman Ramos. And Councilmember Gray, I think you had a question?
Thank you, Madam VP Chair. So for permanent housing for the homeless, so the primary activity performed by this service is contract management with service providers, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is there a comprehensive list of the service providers offering permanent supportive housing, rental assistance, and case management?
Yes, the permanent supportive housing providers are responsible for rental assistance and case management. But what I think we talked about before was the lack of dollars that's really associated with case management for these agencies. So if we think about what a normal ratio can look like for a client that's experiencing homelessness, we have almost 1,000 households in our COC programs, and I think the last I looked at it, we have a $4.3 million allocation for supportive services across that entire continuum. So when we think about our providers and what it really is realistic, our HUD funding does not really allow for supportive services to the way that we'd want. And then I think I shared in a last presentation was we have almost 3,000 households, 1,500 of them are coming from HABC. Our supportive services allocation doesn't come close to what it's really going to take to be able to provide those households with services. Not good services, not targeted person-centered services is enough to provide them with what we call permanent supportive housing services, but not to the level that people deserve when you're taking your most chronic. But that's a funding gap in our ecosystem.
Okay, yeah, because we've received reports just in our office that people have been turned away from the resource providers listed on the website, and so I guess the follow-up would be, are the service providers listed on the website, are they all up to date?
It's different. So on the website, those are agencies that are navigating sites. So I so appreciate the question. Our housing providers are not a part of. Some of them are COC providers, but those are agencies that's under contract to provide permanent supportive housing, to provide case management. What you're seeing on our website is we ask for agencies to be access points and tell us about your resources and can you navigate. The city does not pay agencies to be navigators. We don't pay agencies, the community-based agencies, to do that. It's agencies that has volunteered and said yes. So as such, clearly you're reassigning staff to do that work. So a lot of the agencies that's on the site, yes, they're navigating sites for the city of Baltimore. However, they're not paid to be navigating sites, and they also have to protect their agencies and their staff. So you can't possibly say yes to every single call for navigation, because as you can imagine, if my staff has received 19,000 callers in 2024, that's very, very challenging. So the resources that's on the site, those are agencies that have said yes, and they provide them services, but as such is as available. They're not agencies that are paid to provide those services.
Thank you, I appreciate that insight. I want to turn over to temporary housing now. Emergency shelter for homeless women and children received $0 in FY2026, and it is compared to $3.4 million it received last year for FY25. Has the funding been allocated elsewhere to support homeless women and children, particularly those that are recovering from or are victims of intimate partner violence?
We fund the House of Ruth of Maryland for permanent supportive housing, and they also have a rapid rehousing program in ESG. I think what happened on the budget this year, it's not that funding went away. We were not Some items was coded as outreach and some code was coded as temporary housing. So those funding hasn't changed. We just made sure that it aligned with what made sense. So for instance, what we've added on is shelter spaces for families and children, but you're gonna see that inside the budget for shelter and operations.
Gotcha, okay.
Thank,
I have one more, but I don't know if anyone else has a question, so.
we're, want to get ready to wrap up because we have housing out there waiting for 30 minutes.
This will be, hopefully this will be really quick, so. Last question, I promise. For outreach to homeless, the budget allocation has decreased. Will this impact the quality and delivery of essential services such as case management and outreach to families with only 6 position staff for the entire city?
Laura had a comment for your earlier one, so I want to make sure I give her the opportunity to answer, and then I'll come back to that. Laura?
No, you're okay, Director. I defer to you.
Okay. For the outreach budget, we've been able to add on dollars through CDBG, which helped us, which you're not necessarily going to see in this budget. And it's coming through as a federal source. So we haven't reduced the services. What we was able to add on was just another federal grant and funding source that was going to allow us to continue to provide the services, just not relying on the general fund to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. See, Councilman Gray, what you started, now Councilman Jones has a question.
I just had a statement to make. I just wanted to say I appreciate working with you all in the work that you do. I appreciate going out on the count and showing me how you do all that great work and canvassing the area and talking and interacting with one of our most vulnerable populations in the city. So just want to give you kudos on the work that you do. The people who are often forgotten about aren't because of your office, and understand things like the count you do every year, which you really don't have to do every year. It's really required to do biannually, but because getting the data, getting the information is so important, you all go the extra mile. So just want to say thank you.
Thank you for getting to know our programs. For those that don't know, he's attended quite a few events this last year, so I appreciate it. I also want to take a moment to just thank my team. I think that a lot of what we're talking about, I'm the person that's presenting it, but they are really working their butts off. So I really want to thank Lakeisha, who's sitting over here as my deputy. We get a ton of support from other city agencies. Like when someone says to me, what do you love? I love the fact that this administration is incredibly helpful. I think Laura, who's sitting in back, can tell you all more about homeless services than any other budget director in the country. So I just want to lift up the fact that this office has so much support across the city infrastructure. And people have been very patient with me as we've been building a team. I think it was a running joke that Director Simmons just takes forever to hire, but we really are building a great team. So I want to say thank you to them, and thank you to the mayor and the CA for a ton of support, and JD as well.
Thank you, Councilman Jones, for your wrap up. And thank you, Ms. Sims, and your team for the great dedicated work that you continue to do to help all of our residents and citizens thrive for a better way of living.
Thank you, ma'am.
Please stay on call in case we need to call you back.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Now we're going to just reset for a minute or two to make the transition for the Department of Housing and Community Development to enter.